Okay, let's go ahead and get started. First of all, from the state agency, let me wish you all a very healthy school year, and hope everyone stays safe. Now let's get on into our topic for the day, which is our procurement plan and code of conduct. Both are required by USDA. Each SFA must have their own documented procedures for procurement, and they should reflect what they are actually doing. SFAs that develop the procurement documents utilizing the sample procurement plan and follow the plan that they have in place have had far less findings than SFAs that have developed their own plan. Of course, the sample procurement plan has to be changed to meet the needs of your SFA. As we begin reviewing procurement plans for SFAs as part of the online application process, it's noted that many of them are not reflecting how the SFA is actually procuring. If you have submitted a procurement plan that doesn't match how you are actually procuring, you can create a revision when your application is approved and upload a new procurement plan. So first, let's talk about the code of conduct. All sponsors that participate in child nutrition programs have to have a code of conduct for all people engaged in the awarding and administration of contracts that are supported with child nutrition funds. And the code of conduct states where the areas of conflicts of interest can be. It could, or for who it can be from. It can be the employer, officer, or agent, any member of their immediate family, his or her partner, an organization which employs or is about to employ any one of the above. So any of these can cause conflicts of interest. The code of conduct form that you have to submit to the state agency must state that the employers, officers, or agents shall neither solicit nor accept any gratuities, favors, or anything of monetary value from contractors, potential contractors, or parties to sub-agreements. The penalties for violation for the standards of code of conduct may include, but are not limited to, being reprimanded by the Board of Education, dismissal by the Board of Education, as well as any legal action that's necessary. Go to the next slide. The USDA Code of Conduct prototype, it is written by USDA, and the SFA may utilize either their own code of conduct as long as it addresses all of the requirements discussed on the previous slide. The SFA may utilize the USDA prototype code of conduct, and I always recommend that because USDA wrote it, so they can't find anything wrong. Remember that each person that's involved in the procurement process must sign a code of conduct form. Too often we get where the SFA director sign the code of conduct form, but they're not the ones approving the contract. The code of conduct form must be maintained on file at the SFA, and it's uploaded to the CMP website when completing the online application. If an SFA uses an RFP, the proposals must be evaluated by a committee of employees. So each of those people are involved in the procurement process and must sign the code of conduct. In almost all cases, the SFA director recommends an award, but is not the final approver. The final approver must also complete the code of conduct. So moving on, we're going to talk about your procurement plan for micro purchases. If you remember, the micro purchase method of procurement is used to purchase supplies or services where the dollar amount does not exceed $10,000. And to the extent practical, the SFA has to distribute micro purchases equitably amongst qualified suppliers. Micro purchases can be awarded without soliciting competitive quotations if the SFA considers the price to be reasonable. Now, during your procurement review, the person who's your reviewer is going to take a look at your micro purchases to ensure that multiple suppliers were used for like items. If they were not, it would be a finding on your review. The micro purchase procedures that you have in your procurement plan must include how you're going to provide equitable distribution of micro purchases amongst qualified suppliers. If you're looking at the slide here, you see it's actually supposed to be a chart. I don't know why it didn't come across on the slide, but each of these planned purchases are using the micro purchase method. As you can see from this procurement plan, the SFA has decided what items they will purchase using the micro purchase method. And the first is office supplies. The SFA plans to alternate between purchasing office supplies from Walmart and Office Depot. They're also purchasing t-shirts for employee uniforms, and they have included that they will be alternating purchases between 2 t-shirt shops. SFAs always need repair parts, and this SFA plans to purchase from both Home Depot and Lowe's. Of course, these stores aren't going to carry specialty parts that we often need in school food service. The SFA could use the micro purchase for these other parts as well, as long as the purchase does not exceed the $10,000 threshold. But you would still need to make sure that you distribute micro purchases equitably. If you're an SFA that's in a small rural area and there's only one local store that's within a reasonable distance, you need to indicate that in your procurement plan. In this example, Rivertown Market is the only grocery store that's within 40 miles. It's not reasonable to expect the SFA to utilize more than one grocery store, but just put it in your procurement plan. Moving on to small purchase procedures. The small purchase method can be used if the purchase is below the state threshold of $30,000, unless the district threshold is less. In this case, in this example, the district threshold is $20,000. So the SFA has to use the district threshold because it is more restrictive. Now, remember that charter school small purchase threshold is $250,000 or less. I'm going to refer to the $30,000 threshold. So when you're using a small purchase method of procurement, you have to make sure you have written specifications and provide those to each vendor. You must provide clear and accurate descriptions of any technical requirements. Where applicable, you may you must receive the exact same information and specifications.
Okay, can y'all hear me now? This is Courtney. I'm gonna pinch it until Babette comes back. So,
Courtney, I'm here.
okay, you're back? Okay.
That was just my computer that lost internet.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay, well, that's okay. I'm gonna let you take back over then.
The small purchase is awarded to the responsible and responsive vendor that is lowest in price. It's the next slide. Remember that responsive means that the vendor submits a bid that conforms to all specifications and terms of the solicitation. Responsible means that the vendor is capable of performing successfully under the terms of the contract. And as always, document all of your procedures. What constitutes an adequate number of sources? A minimum of 3 sources should always be contacted. It's a good practice to obtain in writing 3 sources that are eligible, able, and willing to provide the products, goods, and/or services that are needed. Again, make sure you maintain your solicitation documents and keep records of the informal solicitation process. As you can see on this slide, this snippet is from the procurement plan. And the SFA is stating what companies they plan to contact for quotes. Now, certainly, if an SFA finds additional possible vendors, they can always add them to the list, because remember that strong competition leads to lower prices. So this SFA is small, so they're going to get weekly quotes for produce, but be reminded that the total purchases for the year cannot exceed the $30,000 threshold. You can also get online quotes. Online quotes may be used as sources for small quotes as well. You just need to make sure that you maintain your documentation. And I'm going to stop here for just a second to tell you a scenario that happened just this last week where everybody knows that there's problems in the supply chain, and equipment is one of the things that is taking a very long time to come in for SFAs. And I got a call from an SFA director and she said it was going to be 10 to 12 weeks before this piece of equipment could come in. And she actually looked on Amazon for the piece of equipment, and they were going to have it shipped into her within the week. So we're kind of having to think outside the box this year. So if you have any questions or any problems with procuring, please let me know. Make sure that that you provide adequate competition, because during an administrative review, the state agency is going to have to determine whether, in their judgment, free and open competition has occurred. It's very important to maintain all documentation to support the award process. So moving on to formal procurement, the SFA has to plan how you are going to complete the formal bid process. You're either going to do an invitation for bid or a competitive proposal or an RFP. So here's a snippet from the formal procurement chart. Note in this formal procurement table, the SFA would include all formal procurements that they anticipate that they will need. This SFA plans to purchase frozen, canned, bakery, pasta, cleaning supplies, and paper from the same vendor and award it as a bottom line bid. And they can do this as long as they have 3 or more companies that are able and willing to compete. The SFA plans to use an IFB for fresh bread and will award it as a bottom line bid. Now remember, in order for a company to be responsive, they must be able to supply all items the SFA is requesting for dish machine and chemicals and service, The SFA plans to use an RFP because the services that are provided by the company is important. So you would have to develop criteria that you're going to use to evaluate each prospective vendor. When you advertise your procurement, whether it be an IFB or an RFP, it has to be announced in ways that do not restrict free and open competition. It's recommended that you utilize more than one method to reach the widest possible audience. You can't use only direct mailings because it limits free and open competition. So you got some sources for advertising your procurements. You can advertise in regional newspapers, trade periodicals, procurement websites, as well as direct mailings. I want you to pay special attention to this slide. I've looked at a lot of advertisements that SFAs write, and they're very, very, very long. And these are the requirements that the advertisement must contain. It has to have a general description of items that are going to be purchased, the deadline for submitting questions, and the date that responses will be provided, the date of the pre-bid meeting, if applicable, and whether attendance is required or not, which most food bids, we don't have pre-bid meetings, the deadline for submission of proposals, the address where the complete solicitation, including all of the specifications and forms, can be obtained. And then you always include the non-discrimination statement. So with the high cost of advertising, you really want to make sure you limit your advertisement to the minimum requirements. Remember that the bid has to be published twice in a regional newspaper that is in the locality. A small town newspaper isn't considered a regional news source. Also remember that the first advertisement must be at least 15 days before the bid opening. And in addition to the newspaper, public SFAs must also publish by electronic media. Your solicitation has to clearly define the purchase conditions. The items that have to be included are the contract period, date, time, and location of the bid opening, and how the vendor will be informed of the bid results, terms and conditions that each bidder must fulfill to be evaluated, benefits to the SFA if the contractor does not perform as contracted, and a statement regarding the return of purchase incentives, discounts, rebates, and credits to the school food service account. If you're going to have piggybacking, you also have to have that in your original solicitation. If there will be an escalation, de-escalation clause based on a cost index, that would need to be included. You want to make sure you also include the method of evaluation and the type of contract. Is it going to be a bottom line contract? Is it going to be an item by item contract? You also want to include specific bid procedures that must be included, and all solicitations, of course, must include the access requirement by the SFA, the state agency, USDA, and the Controller General. So as we said, the solicitation has to clearly define the purchase conditions. And the purchase conditions have to include the awarding contractor to maintain all required records for 3 years after final payment. The solicitation has to include a description of the order process. You must also sign the non-collusion statement. It's also called the independent price certificate. You need to provide detailed specifications, and estimated quantities of products should be included in your solicitation as well. This is an optional provision. You may want to include that you are going to compare all pricing received from your bids to the State of Louisiana Office of State Purchase Pricing. By using this provision, if the Office of State Purchasing price is lower, then you can use that contract. And it gives you the flexibility to use the state contract without gathering all of the documents that the state is required to provide in order to use it normally. Vendors may also decrease the price that they quote because everyone has access to the prices on state contract. And so the state contracts can also be useful in rural areas where SFAs have a difficult time getting vendors to bid. And when a vendor contracts with OSP, they agree to serve the entire state regardless of the location. All formal solicitations must include the affirmative action steps as outlined in 2 CFR 200. The affirmative action steps have to include placing qualified small and minority businesses and women's business enterprises on solicitation lists. You have to assure that small and minority businesses and women's business enterprises are solicited whenever they are potential sources. You also can divide total requirements when it's economically feasible into smaller tasks or quantities to permit maximum participation by small and minority businesses and women's business enterprises. You also need to state that you're establishing delivery schedules where the requirements permit, which encourages participation by small and minority businesses and women's business enterprises. Next is using the services and assistance as appropriate of such organizations as the Small Business Administration and the Minority Business Development Agency of the Department of Commerce, and requiring the prime contractor, if subcontracts are to be let, to also list all of these steps, all these affirmative action steps. We've seen where a lot of contracts contain all of the affirmative action steps, but when it comes to a review, the reviewer asks the SFA what steps did they actually take, and the SFA can't answer the question. So while the affirmative action steps have to be included in the solicitation, the SFA must also indicate in their procurement plan how is that going to be accomplished. I've included 2 links here on this slide that you can use to research qualified small and minority and women's businesses. It's the SBA list and the Hudson Initiative list. You should print the Hudson list and keep it with your bid documents. The SBA list is massive. And so my suggestion would be to save it electronically and note that you consulted the SBA list with your bid documents, because you will be asked on an administrative review what steps you took to assure that minority businesses and labor surplus forms and women's businesses were solicited whenever possible. Remember that if you're going to do an RFP rather than an IFB, you must have a set of weighted award criteria. And remember, an RFP is where price is not the only factor, but it has to be weighted higher than any other factor. And each prospective vendor must be provided the award criteria and the weight of each criteria in your solicitation. An RFP award is made to the responsible vendor that is the most advantageous to the SFA with price and other factors considered. I've included a sample request for proposal scorecard. There is also a sample in the sample procurement plan. And the SFA can it's a Word document, and the SFA can include their own scoring criteria and weight of each criteria for what's important to them, as long as price is the primary factor. If you're going to do a commodity processing bid, you also have to include the value pass-through method that will be used, a provision for information in the bid and in the responses for food recall procedures. You have to have a requirement that the vendor provides contact information for the contact person and the backup contact person for handling food recalls. And in your solicitation, you must include the SFA contact and backup contact for handling food recalls. There have been numerous findings on procurement records for not including this information in commodity processing bids. When using a cost reimbursable contract, which would be a cost plus a flat fee contract, you must include a statement that allowable cost will be paid to the vendor minus any discounts, rebates, or credits. When you're doing a cost reimbursable contract, you have to make sure and include the following provisions. The contractor has to exclude all unallowable costs from its billing documents and certify that only allowable costs are submitted for payment, and records have been established that maintain the visibility of unallowable costs, including directly associated costs, in a manner suitable for contract cost determination and verification. The contractor must identify the amount of each discount, rebate, and any other applicable credit on any bill and invoice that's presented to the SFA for payment. And it has to individually identify the amount of the discount, rebate, or in the case of any other applicable credit, the nature of the credit. If approved by the state agency, the SFA may permit the contractor to report this information on a less frequent basis than monthly, but no less frequently than yearly. If you're needing to contract with the food service management company and our charter school, there's numerous requirements and is now in a separate training. So you can see the link on this slide for that training. A non-competitive proposal is used if items are available only from a single source, when the award of a contract is not feasible under small purchase, sealed method, or competitive negotiation. So when can it be used? Well, you may be using one right now. I know that people, again, with supply issues are having trouble with getting some items that they have normally on their menu. For an example, I had one SFA that is unable to get French toast. She had that on her commodity contract, and she was informed that that would not be delivered until after the first of the year. So now she's going to have to procure French toast to be used on her menu. She can do it by quote, or if she needs it today because school is opening, she can do it by non-competitive proposal, because we are in an emergency situation. So when can you use a non-competitive proposal? Well, of course, if the item is only available from a single source, if you've got an emergency that does not permit a delay resulting from the competitive solicitation, when the awarding agency authorizes non-competitive proposals, If after solicitation of a number of sources, competition is determined to be inadequate. Now, remember that all non-competitive proposals must be approved by the state agency. If you're doing a one-time purchase of a new food item, let's just say a vendor comes in to show you an item and you want to try it, you can do a one-time purchase without competitively procuring for samples, because you want to determine whether it's acceptable by the students. But the SFA must maintain documentation of the item name, dollar amount, the vendor that you used, and the reason for the non-competitive procurement. If you use non-competitive procurement in an emergency, the emergency procedure must be approved by the SFA, an SFA official. You have to keep a log of what emergency purchases you've done. And at a minimum, you have to maintain the following documentation: the item name, the dollar amount, the vendor, and the reason for the emergency. If you're trying to use another organization's contract, you need to make sure that the original solicitation was properly let and awarded. So you must maintain all the documents on file that are in memo 18-79. Procurements that are awarded based on a market basket analysis must be awarded using an established representation sample of goods. And you must select the representative sample of goods. And F&S recommends that the aggregate total dollar value be at least 75% or more of the estimated value of the contract to be awarded. You also have to make sure that you obtain prices for all of the remaining goods not included in your analysis before the final award. The pricing of the goods has to be reasonable, and all items must have clear and accurate descriptions. I've included this. This is not a requirement, but you may include an option in your proposals that gives you an option to add goods. It has to be included in the original solicitation and contract. And this language is in the 2021 sample procurement plan, and have updated it to include some verbiage so that you can use it in your contracts if you choose. Basically, it's saying that you can add additional goods and services, but you have to provide a limit as to what percentage dollar amount that you can add to your contract. And USDA recommends no more than 5 to 10%. So I've included sample verbiage in the updated sample procurement plan to use if you want. So make sure that, you know, and try to keep it to the 5 to 10% of the estimated value of the contract, and make sure you maintain the records of the additional goods. That's the downside, is that you got to maintain records and make sure it doesn't exceed the percentage that you said you weren't going to exceed. When doing a renewal option, you can do a renewal option if your vendor agrees to it, of course, but it has to be in your original contract, your solicitation and your contract. And you can also add the additional goods and or quantities to the contract if it's renewed. Each year of a renewed contract would have a new cost basis for the contract year. But USDA does recommend that there not be extensions for any more than 3 years total. So 2 additional extensions. Any vendor who has demonstrated poor performance during a current or a previous agreement with the SFA can be considered a non-responsible bidder, and their bid can be rejected as long as the SFA has maintained proper documentation. The 21-22 procurement plan does contain some sample termination language for termination for convenience, for cause. And there's also some language on how to disqualify a bidder in that sample contract that you might want to consider using. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. Is there any questions? Can you speak to any waivers regarding procurement? The waiver that is in place is, and it's not really a waiver, it's USDA has made it clear that with COVID-19, we are certainly under emergency procurement. The state has also, in fact, I just updated that today. There should be a memo going out that the governor has also extended emergency procurement for the state of Louisiana until September 1st. The problem with the state procurement is it is month by month. And so we don't know when the emergency will end. We don't know when the governor will no longer extend emergency procurement. I spoke to a representative from the Secretary of State's office a few months back because I wanted to make sure that our SFAs were not caught off guard and the state end emergency procurement and us be kind of left in the dust. And what I was told by the Secretary of State's office was that that SFAs should procure as normally as possible following the procurement guidelines. And then we can deal with things on a case-by-case basis. And I have dealt with numerous case-by-case issues where SFAs have not been able to follow the normal procurement process for one reason or another, where it was an emergency. So the best thing for you to do is follow the normal procurement procedures. And then if an issue arises that is an emergency and that you need help on, please give us a call. I don't see where there's any more questions. Courtney, do you see any questions? Okay. Well, there's no more questions. Certainly, again, feel free to call us if you have any problems. We know that procurement and supply chain is a big issue right now, and we will do our very best to help you in any way possible. Please have a good day.